Hello everyone. So today we are going to learn how to factor trinomials with a leading coefficient of 1. So you're going to need your composition book for this. So go ahead, take a minute to get that out. You might also want a calculator, so you can go get your fancy calculator or you can use a 4-function calculator. Up to you. So I want us to remember a few things. So way back in the beginning of the year, we did things where we multiplied binomials. So I want you to remember binomial means two terms. So notice that each of these have two terms. So hence the name binomial. Okay, we also learned different ways to multiply binomials. So I'll just remind you that we have that area model with boxes. So when we did that, I would take that 3x plus 2 and put it on one side, so I can imagine the length of that side is 3x plus 2, and then I would put my x plus 1 on the top, and I can imagine that that side is x plus 1. I'm not choosing to put the positive next to it because I know it's positive. I would put a negative if it were negative. So then you kind of imagine the box and you say, I'm multiplying 3x times x. Well, 3x to the 1 times x to the 1 is really, imagine there's a 1 there. 3 times 1 would give you 3. And x times x would give you x squared. So that's 3x squared. Then you're going to multiply your 3x, and I'm just going to underline this, times your 1, and that would just give you 3x. And then I'm going to underline this again. You'll see it as I do it, 2 times 1x, so that's going to give me 2x. And then you're going to multiply, I'll do this in light green, and you would do 2 times 1, and that'll give you 2. So recall that we did the adding of like terms, and we said this is 3x squared. We combined these and got 5x plus 2. So what we're going to learn today is how to take something like this, 3x squared plus 5x plus 2, and turn it back into the two binomials. It's called factoring. It's a lot of fun. So let's go on to our next slide. So factoring, we're going to do the reverse. So I'm going to start with just showing you. It's like d squared plus 8d plus 15. So this, you imagine there's a 1 in front of it. And we're not going to try to do an example right now. I'm going to take you through the process. I'm just going to show you that when we're talking today, we're going to be factoring trinomials. So tri means we have 3 terms, and they are going to have a leading coefficient of 1. Now that's important for us because later we'll learn about a bigger leading coefficient, and we'll also learn about taking out a GCF, or a greatest common factor, but today we're going to keep it simple. So I can grab that example, d squared plus 8d plus 15. Example just tells you, hey, today we're going to focus on one type of factoring, trinomials with that leading coefficient of 1, and there's no common factor. We call that a GCF. And you're probably familiar with greatest common factor from the practice we've done already and from your prior years of school. So let's go on to the examples. I'm just going to go, so we have a process, and I do want you to write this process down. So I'm going to say on this slide for a little bit, I don't have a worksheet for you where you can just say, I've got it written, so I've got to write it. You have to write it yourself. So you're going to find numbers that multiply together to make the last term. So your first step is you're going to find numbers that multiply together to make the last term. So I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to put that on the top. So d squared plus 8d plus 15. So you're going to find numbers that multiply together to make that last term. Okay, so that last term is 15. So really, it's a fancy way of saying you're going to find the factors of 15. So 1 and 15, 3 and 5. Those are our choices. The smaller number, the fewer choices. Okay, now you're going to find the numbers from that list that sum together to get the middle term. Well, I think that probably leaps out at you that 3 plus 5 would sum together to give the middle term. So when we do that, we turn into factors or factoring, and I'll switch this to this color of green. I put my two binomials. The way I'm going to make a d squared would be d times d. That gives me d squared. And then my factors that I chose that worked would be 3 and 5. So I will have 3 and 5. Now, what makes this fun is that these are both positive. If they're not both positive, I have to consider how I'm going to get that middle term. It might be that they have to subtract. If it is a negative last term, it might be that one of them has to be positive and one has to be negative in order to get an answer of a negative number. So I know this is going to be d plus 3 times d plus 5. And when I use my boxes to multiply that together, or I use that term we used in the beginning of the year, FOIL, first terms times the outer terms times the inner terms times the last term, I end up with d squared plus 8d plus 15. So let's go on and do some example problems before where we've got d squared plus 8d plus 15. So our first example is x squared plus 5x plus 6. So remember, our first step is to list the factors of that last term, the numbers that multiply together to give me 6. So 1 times 6 and 2 times 3. Like I said, the smaller the number, the shorter list of factors. So the second step, so I'll just call this step 1. The second step is to identify those factors that will sum to give you 5. So I think that would be pretty clearly leaping out at us is that 2 and 3 will give us 5. So now I have my two binomials. The way I'm going to make x squared is x times x. The way I will make 6 is not 1 times 6, but 2 times 3. And I'll add them together because I know that everything is positive. So I'll just model this. On the side, you can imagine that this is x and 2. And on the top, it's x and 3. You don't have to write this. You can just watch this. I'm going to multiply my boxes. X times x is x squared. 3 times x is 3x. 2 times x is 2x. And 2 times 3 is 6. So you have your like terms, x squared plus 5x plus 6. You don't need to show that. I'm just showing it to you. Your answer is right here. You have factored. So now is what we switched our variable. Next step, we have that x squared plus 8x plus 15. That should look very familiar. So we're really not going to be doing this one so much, except for I want you to know that here, x is our most common variable, but you're going to see p or q or m or n or y or any host of numbers. Don't be alarmed by a different number or a different variable. So this is exactly the same. And now our last one, the example, takes us up a notch, and it's saying that we have a minus in the middle. So now we have a little more thinking to do. So suddenly that first step of finding the numbers that multiply to 12, first of all, it's a slightly larger number. So you have 1 and 12. You have 2 and 6. You have 3 and 4. Now ignore your sign for a second and say, well, I need to get 7. And I'm going to see that 3 and 4 would give me 7. Now, in particular, I would have to have a negative 3 and a negative 4 to give me a negative 7. So that's really nice because I'm answering for myself, oh, I need a negative 7, so I need a negative 3 and a negative 4. It just so happens that my rules of multiplying, I know a negative times a negative is a positive, so that will turn into positive 12 when I multiply. So what this will factor into is your x and your x, your negative 3, and your negative 4. Now to check this, you can do your FOIL, and I'm going to use that as a model this time. X squared is your first term. Your outer term is minus 4x. Your inner term is minus 3x. And your last term is plus 12. So you end up with x squared minus 7x plus 12. So that is the other way to check. You can also check with those boxes. And I know kids in the beginning of the year had strong feelings whether they liked the boxes or whether they liked FOIL. Notice when I'm doing the boxes, I keep my negative sign here because that helps me. Then I can do x times x. I can do negative 4x, negative 3x, and 12. You will get fast at this to where you don't need to show anything on paper. Now, I want you to stop, pause this video and try number 4. And after you've paused it, Mr. Hillman will pause this video for you and you can try it, and then he'll say, okay, let's show how this works. So welcome back. I'm hoping that you have stopped this video because people always make mistakes. I didn't actually expect you to stop this video yet, but I'm not going to try to edit it. So presumably Mr. Hillman has made you try this on your own, and now you've come back and you are here thinking that you were supposed to have done this alone. And that's okay. You probably did do it alone. So I'm going to start with my first steps, 1 and 40, 2 and 20, 3 doesn't go into 40, 4 and 10, 5 and 8. Okay, now here's the thing. When you get to a bigger number, you might not bother to write everything down because you're already thinking ahead and you're saying, well, I know 5 and 8 make 3. Okay, so if 5 and 8 are going to make 3, how are they going to make 3? They're going to make 3 by doing a positive 8 and a negative 5. That's how they're going to make a positive 3. I know a negative times a positive is a negative. So if you're already thinking that, that's fantastic. So now I would put it into my 2 binomials, and I'll have my x and my x. And now I have my minus 5 and my plus 8. I can do my multiplying out to check with my FOIL or with my boxes. And now truly we are ready for the self-practice. So you had this extra problem that you probably had to muddle through, but now it is time to do the self-practice. So on this next page, actually, they're all 3 up here for you. And I'm going to have you spend a little bit of time trying each of them. Once you're done and you let your teacher, Mr. Hillman, know that, then he'll come back and he'll play the video where I talk through it. So welcome back. Here are our solutions for x squared plus 11x plus 18. Now ask yourself, am I already starting to get this without listing everything? If you're like me, you'll probably spend a while listing things. And if you're someone who doesn't like to show your work, you probably are already not listing. So I have 1 and 18, I have 2 and 9. I could stop here, or I could include the 3 and 6. Clearly, the 2 and 9 are going to give me the 11 I need. So I'll have x plus 2 and x plus 9. Okay, now you might already be at a point where you can mentally check this. X squared plus 9x plus 2x plus 18 would be a physical check where you're showing, okay, this is x squared plus 11x plus 18. The boxes would also be a physical check. Some of you are going to be beyond this very quickly. Some of you will do this for a long while. We're all different in what we want to see. So you can multiply through your boxes and see the same process. Here's our next one. X squared minus 12x plus 35. It's worth noting now that the better you are with your multiplication facts, the easier this is going to be. So you've got your 1 and 35, you have your 5 and 7. Ask yourself that next question of how do I get a negative 12? Oh, I need to do a negative 5 and a negative 7. Bonus, negative times a negative gives me a positive. So right now I can tell that this will turn into x minus 5 and x minus 7. If you're thinking this is fun, you're like me, puzzle solving, kind of figuring out how this all goes together, it's great. If you're thinking, what is the point of this? Rest assured, you will find out soon what the point of all of this is, and the better you are at this, the better the word problems will go for you in those real world situations. So our last one, actually there may have been 4, I don't recall. You've got 21, so you've got yourself 1 and 21. Believe it or not, sometimes the big factors end up working, not usually with a leading coefficient of 1, but later when we do a larger leading coefficient. Now you have 3 and 7. Okay, so 3 and 7, how will you make a negative 10? You will have a negative 3 and a negative 7. So when you multiply those together, you will get a positive 21. Negative times a negative is a positive. So you'll have your x, and you'll have a minus 3 and a minus 7. And now you are done. So when you are done, you'll be in Brightspace again, and it will tell you what to do next. Thanks for watching.